Good evening, everyone. We're going to get us started. We're grateful that you've come out on this chilly evening to be with us. And really grateful to Israel Policy Forum for pivoting so quickly as is necessary. I'm Shira Epstein. I'm the Senior Director of Adult Engagement here at Central Synagogue, and we warmly welcome you to this evening's program. So again, as you know, originally tonight was in our series Prospects for Peace, but given the events of the last few days, we felt, of course, that we needed to hold space. All of us are feeling a bit dazed, a bit wondering what's coming next, and need to be in community, and this is what this space is. So in just a minute, I'll welcome up our speakers for this evening. A reminder of our community brief. For those who have been at our classes and our programs this year, we've instituted a brief, which is really an agreement between those of you who are here and those of us, in some of the norms that we institute to make it as, especially as we're all coming here tonight from points, I am sure, of pain and hurt and confusion, that we can be here with multiple perspectives and come from a place of curiosity mindset that will hear some new things, maybe things that aren't from other perspectives that we agree with or the political stances that we hold, but we're here to understand better and potentially have our minds changed. And that learning from diverse opinions will help us to question and strengthen our own perspectives. So we will be, there were note cards available when you came in, and we'll be passing more out later. If you have a question, you'll write it down there, and to please do so from a space of openness and curiosity. And of course, assuming positive intent. We might not hear things in the way we would like to hear them, but to know we're all here from a standpoint of wanting to understand more about what's going on in Israel and this really challenging situation. So with all of that in mind, I'm going to introduce Shanie Reichman, who is Israel Policy Forum's Director of Strategic Initiatives and IPF Atid, which is quite a title. So I look forward to hearing, just like you, from our speakers tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Shira. Aziz and David, you can come up too. You are invited. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. I'm Shanie Reichman. So first of all, following this reception, those in their 20s and 30s are invited to a reception hosted by IPF Atid right there on the right side, but we'll direct you there. Thank you to Central Synagogue for hosting us. It's an honor to be the final session of your series, which is also the first session of our series. We are going to be sort of taking this tour around the country starting tonight. So. A privilege to be here. Israel Policy Forum's mission is to elevate the public discourse and advance pragmatic U.S. policies to ensure a secure, Jewish, and democratic state of Israel through a viable resolution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. In this moment of profound complexity, we thought it was essential to zoom out and bring together some firsthand perspectives that represent the diversity of experiences and interests in the region. As many of you know, we were supposed to feature an Israeli and a Palestinian on this panel. As is probably clear to you, they were unable to leave the region. And so we are very grateful to David for stepping in. And thank you, Aziz, for schlepping all the way from Saudi Arabia. But with their deeply felt absence, there's no shortage of what to discuss. We are joined by Israel Policy Forum CEO David Halperin, to my right. And in addition to David, we're honored to be joined by Saudi Arabia-based analyst Dr. Aziz Alghashian. Aziz is a non-resident fellow at the Arab Gulf States Institute in Washington and a Saudi researcher and fellow with the Sectarianism, Proxies, and Desectarianization Project. Oh, I've never heard that word. It's very hard to say. His research focuses on Saudi-Israel relations and Saudi foreign policy. Before we jump into an actual conversation, we're going to throw it back to David to help us unpack this current moment. Israel preemptively attacked Iran's nuclear capabilities, and the nations are now in direct conflict, as of course we all know. What do we need to know about this? What should we be thinking about? Help us frame the current moment, recognizing that we hadn't planned on focusing on Iran in this panel, but obviously need to now.
Yeah, thank you. Hello. Thank you, Shanie, and thank you to Central Synagogue, and thank you to Aziz for being part of this conversation. Especially at moments like these, our intention with this program and with this series across the country is to showcase that at a moment when the conversations about what's happening in the Middle East are incredibly fraught and often toxic, it's important for us to have meaningful conversations about what can be done to advance to a more peaceful and secure future, and particularly to do so with young analysts who are committed to a better future for the years to come. And it's no small matter for someone to come from a country that does not have relations with Israel to talk about the challenges of making relations with Israel. And so first, I want to thank Aziz for joining us on this journey, as this is the first of many cities we'll be visiting. Obviously, we had no idea that we'd be talking in the midst of a war, and perhaps we should have, because the signs were there. First, before I jump into those signs, I want to acknowledge what was said at the outset, that I know if you're like me, you spent the weekend in touch with your family members in Israel. You probably have folks that are stranded in Israel or outside of Israel trying to go in one direction or another. And I know many of you, like many of us, have family members, their homes, their property that's been impacted by this incredible bombardment from Iran. These are truly unprecedented times. So how did we get here? The Israelis ultimately came to a conclusion that this was the best possible moment to strike at Iran's nuclear program that it would ever really have. And I think that is the conclusion that really brings us to the peak of Netanyahu's political career. He's been talking about Iran for 30 plus years. But it's also one that we should acknowledge is across the Israeli political landscape. Concern of the Iran nuclear program now goes back many, many years, certainly 2 decades, if not 3 decades. And a number of events brought us to this moment. First and foremost, of course, is the events of October 7th, the horrific attack by Hamas that ultimately brings Hezbollah into the fight, the extraordinary decimation of Hamas's leadership, and most importantly, its arsenal of rockets aimed at Israeli cities. Now, those rockets were long viewed as not serving a point that to threaten Israel because of a specific political argument that Hezbollah had with Israel. Those rockets, as part of Hezbollah's arsenal, were essentially Iran's insurance policy against an Israeli attack directly on Iran's nuclear facilities. And of course, as we know, since October 7, Hezbollah's leadership and its rocket capacity were completely neutralized, so much so that when Israel began this attack a few days ago, Hezbollah even issued a statement that it did not wish to enter the fight. This provided an extraordinary window. The other piece of information that led to the window is the attacks by Iran directly on Israel's soil, and first in April of last year, and then following that in October, where the United States and other partners coordinated with Israel to shoot down ballistic missiles fired at Israel. It essentially provided an exercise in the defense against the barrage, but more to the point was that it created an unprecedented pretext. Iran had no longer attacked Israel through its proxy network on Israel's border, but it had now attacked Israel directly from what are known as surface-to-surface missiles, going directly from Iran, targeting directly Israeli soil. And in the counterattack in October, Israel effectively decimated Iran's aerial defense systems, again, providing another opportunity for an attack like we've seen in recent days, without Hezbollah response and without Iran's ability to attack Israel or to stop Israel's aerial attack on its nuclear facilities. There's two other elements that I think we can add to this story. One, of course, is the negotiations that Donald Trump was pursuing with Iran, that the Israelis were certainly nervous that if a deal would be reached, it would be setting back the opportunity, this historic window of opportunity with Hezbollah decimated and Iran's defenses removed, from being able to strike directly. And of course, there was concern that Iran was breaking out to a bomb-making material or making moves. There was intelligence that Iran was making moves towards the assembly of a weapon that could turn that highly enriched uranium into a nuclear device. And I would add one other thing, which is that the idea of international pushback to Israel striking Iran was not really a major factor in Israel's calculation after it had already received tremendous amount of international criticism and condemnation over the course of the events since Gaza. Frankly, the Israeli mind says it couldn't get worse. And so you combine these issues of the aerial defense, of Hezbollah off the table, of the concern of a nuclear agreement that would remove this window, and a greater flexibility to endure whatever international attention. And you even add on top of that a political atmosphere in which Netanyahu is seeking to survive politically from the failure of October 7, and certainly would prefer to go back towards facing the Israeli public in elections, having accomplished what he has long stated is his life's long goal, which is to remove the Iranian threat. And all of this kind of created the ingredients that led to Israel's decision to attack. The question now, of course, is not how you start the war, but how you finish it. And the discourse in Israel today is all about one thing, and that is this war cannot be a success in setting back Iran's nuclear facilities unless one facility in particular is taken out, known as Fordo, buried deep in a mountain. I see a lot of nodding heads. I'm telling you all things you already know, I'm sure. But only the United States is believed to have the bunker-busting bombs that would be capable of destroying that nuclear facility deep inside a mountain. And the belief in Israel is if that is not destroyed, whatever gains Israel has made by setting back its nuclear facilities at other locations like Natanz and Isfahan and others, Iran will still have the highly enriched capacity to break out quickly to a bomb without the restraints of a nuclear deal. And so the decisions that are being made in the next few days by the President of the United States on whether to engage or whether not will highly influence the course of events that comes next. But I think there's one other thing that we have to keep in mind, which is it's highly uncertain how long this can last. How much interceptors, we've never seen Israel face a barrage of ballistic missiles day after day, night after night, facing this level of casualties and frankly fear. And it is unclear, are we going to see another several days, if not weeks, of the kind of days we've seen recently, or are we going to see a kind of war of attrition over time begin to emerge? I think that Donald Trump has thus far sent a very clear message that he wants to come back to the table. Iran has sent signals about wanting to come back to the table. And it is highly uncertain how Iran will use the latter to begin to come back down, given the kind of hostilities that are ongoing. And it's also unclear that the Israelis will be ready to simply stop without doing all they can to set back the Iran's nuclear program as much as possible. And the last thing I'll say, which I think needs to be said in a post-October 7 environment, and I know we want to talk about Gaza and the Palestinian issue in greater detail with questions and whatnot, but I think it needs to be said that the conventional wisdom is that the United States is the only power that has the military capabilities to destroy Fordo. But I do want to say that we don't know what we don't know. People used to say to me, do you think Israel has the capacity to do X, Y, Z? And I say, I used to think I had an intelligent answer to that question, but then pagers started blowing up in Hezbollah's pockets, you know? And I don't know what intelligence capabilities and what sort of operations are planned. But it does appear at this point that the initial success of killing 11 nuclear scientists, of decimating the IRGC command, of significantly hitting the ballistic missile capacity that Israel had in the initial days, it led to a kind of euphoria that I think is misplaced, recognizing the very difficult days that we are facing now and the highly uncertain days that are still to come.
Thank you for that analysis, David. First, I will remind everybody that you have note cards, and if you want a note card to ask a question on, you can raise your hand, and one of our colleagues will come and hand them out. And if you have written a question on a note card, you can just wave that in the air, and someone will come and take it from you and bring it over here. But we won't have time for all of them, just setting the expectations. Aziz, I'll turn to you. I'm curious to hear how the current Israel-Iran war is impacting the region, but really specifically Saudi Arabia, which of course has recently reestablished diplomatic ties with Iran, but has a complicated relationship there, and an also complicated relationship with Israel, with whom they've been exploring the possibility of normalization for many years, kind of on and off, and where that stands as well.
Well, firstly, I'd like to say thank you. Thank you all for being here. It's a real honor to be here in this beautiful synagogue. And so thank you very much for your hospitality and inviting me into this, in this environment. I also want to say thanks again to the Israel Policy Forum for facilitating this discussion and for giving an opportunity for me as a Saudi to explain, I think, my position, my analysis, and what my 2 cents are regarding Saudi Arabia and the region. So thank you. I think when Saudis are looking at the region right now, I think they're looking at this with deep anxiety. This is the last thing that Saudis would want. Now, unfortunately, there are some commentary that the Saudis are jubilating, that the Saudis are very happy that this is happening to their main security threat. But in fact, I think what is the Saudi calculation is that this is not potentially eliminating the security threat while weakening it significantly, but potentially provoking it. And I think what the Saudis are doing and thinking is that they do not want to be at the forefront of that, and a forefront of these kind of ramifications later on. Moreover, I think the region in itself is really, we're witnessing a nightmare scenario after nightmare scenario materialize before our very eyes. It started, one of these things, I think these discussions were taking place. There's a great deal of discussions taking place before October 7th. There's a lot of warnings that, listen, there is something that's iniquitous happening here. We need to really address these things. Horrendous attacks of October 7th happened. The ramifications of that and the devastation that took place on the Palestinian people. And we start to see nightmare scenario after nightmare scenario take place in front of our eyes. So I think now we're all very worried. Now, for me, this then, I think, also suggests the question of normalization, and maybe that this leads to normalization with Israel, and Saudi Arabia are actually very happy that this happened, and maybe they see some utility with Israel. In theory, this could have happened, but I think right now, very much as eloquently put by David, regarding the situations that are taking place in Gaza and in the West Bank, and I think the conduct of, unfortunately, the current Israeli Prime Minister and the Israeli government and the extremism that's coming out of there, I think many in the region, and particularly Saudi Arabia, want to distance themselves as much as they can from this Israeli government. And I think there could have been an opportunity, but it really, I think, is going to be missed if there is no real change in the trajectory. I won't even say the policies, but really in the trajectory of where this is going. And then this leaves us really, well, what happens if the region, what happens to the region if this continues? Unfortunately, it's not going to look good, because I think, what stays in Israel, what happens in Israel and Palestine does not stay in Israel and Palestine. What happens even in Iran does not stay in Iran. And this is the nature of the region in itself. It's actually very interconnected in many ways, without even being integrated, but it's still incredibly interconnected. So there's a great deal of anxiety, and I think it really suggests to us that we have a lot of work to do. This is why I appreciate really these discussions and these platforms to shed light on what is required to even entertain the idea of a genuine discussion for normalization. This, of course, is in itself a distant notion, but not impossible. But things could happen very quickly. But there's a lot of things that have to happen beforehand. So I'll leave it at that, and maybe you could.
Aziz, before we shift back to the sort of Israel-Gaza war, I want to ask you what people are missing from the conversation, particularly around the intentions of Saudi Arabia. I shared with you've referred to this as Saudi-splaining, which I love. I shared with you that I've spoken to many Israelis and Palestinians who both believe that they know exactly what the Saudi leadership is thinking, because they have spoken to very important Saudi leaders who have expressed their exact intentions, which are incidentally the opposite intentions as what each of them have heard, right? So what are they actually thinking insofar as you're aware, and what are people missing? What are outsiders sort of missing when it comes to
Well, I don't blame them, because when people visit Saudi for 3 times, 4 times, they you can't blame them for thinking they know everything about Saudi. Three times visiting Saudi is it's immense. It's a big it's a real development, I would say. But in my opinion, I think this idea of Saudi-splaining to me came really when I was having discussions with people from the region that we don't have relations with. And it was very interesting, because I, as a Saudi Arabian who studies Saudi Arabia and particularly Saudi policy towards Israel, who lives in Saudi, the person was saying, no, I don't think you get it, Aziz. The Saudis are saying this, that, and the other. And I was like, well, my friend, I think it's a bit more complicated than that, And then he's like, my friend, I'm right. And I was like, wow, now I know what it's like to be mansplained. And I think this then became something. It was a joke initially, but then I began to see this theme recur time and again, and especially when Saudis are making their statements and they're immediately dismissing it. Now, it's a very complex question, because a lot of the times people like to say the reality of Saudi is really in the secret domain, the quiet domain, the things that people tell us. And here, the Saudis have always been very pragmatic. They've always explained their position towards Israel at one of principle, that if there is some sort of movement on 1, 2, 3 issues, on this particular issue, then there will be movement on relations with Israel. Now, this articulation in itself, this process, this tendency of communication, is oftentimes misconstrued and even deliberately misinterpreted in order for people to have their political point scores. And I think, very much as David spoke earlier about kind of the political dynamic, I think a great deal of times when people want to rush to claim what the Saudis are saying and what the Saudis are thinking, it's more politically motivated to tell people that, hey, calm down, everybody. We're doing great stuff. The Saudis are with us here. And it's astonishing to see this. So I think what's missing is a genuine discussion with Saudis, not about Saudis, which is the prominent kind of process. I think it's also what's missing is, maybe more Saudis could speak a bit more, which is why I'm very happy to be here. That's also to be very frank. And I think, here's the question for me. It's a sensitive time. You know what I'm saying? It's a sensitive time. It's a sensitive topic, how can there be an environment, a safe space for people to not be politicized and their genuine keenness to talk and to discuss to be politicized? And I think when we address this, I think this is then you get to see more and more Saudis, maybe, you get to hear more Saudis from Saudi, which is something that's always been missing.
David, do you have anything to Saudi-splain into this conversation before we move on?
I wouldn't dare.
Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. So I would like to move this conversation a little bit closer to home for some of us. Although I will say that the idea of don't talk about us without us is something that I think Israelis and Palestinians feel too. So maybe the three should all get together.
Yeah. That was the goal. That was the goal of this.
Which was, of course, our intention here. So looking back to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, where can meaningful progress be made? And then we can think about how the Saudis can maybe fit into that picture. But before we were thinking about this Israel-Iran war, which is, of course, dominating the headlines and dominating this conversation, where was there potentially opportunity for us to move forward, thinking about the humanitarian crisis, thinking about on the security front, and thinking about moving forward with normalization as well?
Well, I think in both arenas, it demonstrates to me the importance of the United States, and what the United States says and does has extraordinary influence and impact in both of these arenas. We're talking today about what may happen next in Iran and the wider region is really at the determination of what Donald Trump decides to do. That the United States is in the driver's seat on where this goes next. In Gaza, I think we can't we shouldn't downplay the danger and opportunity that was presented in the first 6 months vis-a-vis with the Trump administration. And what I mean by that is, on the one side, we have the moment early in his presidency when Donald Trump was standing next to Benjamin Netanyahu at the White House and gave the Gaza Riviera speech. I think the Gaza Riviera speech had a extraordinarily destructive impact on the discourse between Israelis and Palestinians, because the one thing that we've long believed to be true is that whatever your politics, whatever your views on how the Israeli-Palestinian issue conflict could be or couldn't be resolved, the one thing that is true is that Israelis and Palestinians are not going anywhere. That between the river and the sea, ultimately, they're going to have to find a way to live with one another because they can't just simply disappear. Well, Donald Trump gave the idea that maybe actually Palestinians could disappear. And I don't think anybody really took it seriously, with the exception of the Israeli government, and most particularly some of the extreme ministers within the Israeli government who began to make operational plans, so much so that Benjamin Netanyahu's most recent speech outlining the goals in which Israel could declare victory in Gaza required implementation of the Trump vision for Gaza. I think that had a very negative impact on preventing the idea of planning for a future day after, because the day after has been articulated as an American enclave that no one actually thinks is going to be possible, but that the Israelis certainly can't be against, because you can't be less Catholic than the Pope. And so I think that had an impact in this latest phase of the conflict in a negative way. I think there was a positive impact in the Trump administration, in that I believe, to the great extent, the Netanyahu government was all but abandoning the hostages. And I think that the Trump administration was committed to finding a way, to pursuing a way to release hostages, remained committed to engaging with hostage families, and to finding a way forward. But it is hard to imagine a meaningful way forward if that way forward is about forced displacement without return, about Israeli reoccupation, about American sort of annexation of this sort. On the humanitarian story, I think, again, we're in a dark chapter for the situation in Gaza, because we had the first chapter was that of a clearly justified war against an enemy that attacked Israel on October 7th. The second chapter of this war in Gaza, I think, was one of euphoria of the Israeli response, the killing of Sinwar, the decimating of Hezbollah. It was sort of when Israel got its mojo back, so to speak. And this third chapter of the conflict in Gaza has been a deeply uncertain, slow, plodding process in which Israel doesn't really have a clear sense of what it's attempting to do militarily, at least in the eyes, certainly, of the broader international community. And that includes a period of 11 weeks in which no humanitarian assistance went to Gaza whatsoever. That was ended by the creation of the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, a new mechanism for delivering humanitarian aid so that it could not be stolen, as it was consistently by Hamas. And Hamas was using that to replenish its financial wherewithal to be able to pay its workers and so forth. So the idea of the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation was to remove aid as a tool for Hamas. And today, I think we're at a point where it is a particularly divisive issue inside Israel and in the broader international community. If you speak with Israelis, it has been a success because Hamas views it as a threat because it is removing Hamas's ability to benefit from the delivery of humanitarian assistance. From the international community's perspective, we're talking about aid that is insufficient for the population, that is based on a distribution center, meaning only those who are able to go to the site and carry a heavy box will actually get aid, and that it is largely dry goods. We're not talking about delivering medical supplies to NGOs who will get those supplies to the hospitals that are actually needed. And so the fear of this new mechanism is that it is insufficient for the entire needs of the population because it's very few distribution sites, and only those who are the strongest in Gaza are capable of receiving that aid, and in some cases, hoarding that aid. Because if you've seen these wild images of people running to receive the boxes, and it's as many boxes as you can carry if you are able to carry them, meaning if you are sick, if you are injured, if you're an elderly, or if you're a child, it is unclear. There is certainly no guarantee that you are receiving any assistance. And so both, I believe, are true. Yes, this is a mechanism that concerns Hamas, and yes, this is woefully insufficient to meet the actual needs of a population that is facing a dire situation each day.
Aziz, where is there room for Saudi Arabia to play an effective role here? Because when I think of incentives for the Israeli government to reorient itself, not to put too much pressure on the Saudis, but Saudi normalization is largely perceived as sort of one of the most important incentives, one of the most amazing potential carrots, if you think of a carrot and a stick, right? So not to say that this all falls on the shoulders of the Saudis, but I do think there's an important role they can play here. What's your take on that?
I think firstly, you're right when it comes to this idea that we are kind of offering carrots. We're playing the role of carrots. I think when it comes to this, this situation, the question of leverage has arisen. And then I think the focus on the idea of leverage suggests that really, firstly, Saudi has no sticks any longer. Situation has no stick, and then that there's no one that has the ability to force the Israeli government to do anything other than the United States. So here, I think the Saudi role is really in that carrot, the incentive, playing the role as the kind of the main incentive to do this. However, I think in many ways, this can potentially be a very dangerous situation. Why? Because in order to really elevate the Palestinian-Israeli issue, in order to guide it into a fundamentally positive trajectory, one cannot lose all the Saudi leverage it has. If the government now in Israel ends up normalizing relations with Israel, and there is, this is a big sign that they could get what they want without any kind of real concessions, significant concessions. So I think the question to normalize relations, or if they, normalization in itself as a as a facilitator of some of these things, of humanitarian aid, et cetera, feels like, in my opinion, yes, there's a lot of pressure for Saudi to normalize, or maybe even make them feel guilty for not normalizing relations. This is one way. And I don't think the Saudis will entertain this, because they'll say, listen, this is not where we want to be placed. However, there can be a place where they could play a role. They can play a role if there are opportunities for them, or if people can explain the different files that they could play. And what do I mean by this? I know it sounds vague, but a lot of the times, people are immediately jumping from what the role that the Saudi can do. It's immediate normalization, and we're jumping straight from 1, 2 to 1,000 right away. The hell is that? There's loads of processes that will then, I think, help get Saudi Arabia to be more confident in playing more of a role. It seems that there is, how Saudis see it, maybe for the Gazan humanitarian situation, a bit of a trap. That, hey, if you want to stop all of this, then you normalize relations with us, and then we could finish all this suffering. This is the problem, and I think we can't waste this opportunity. Normalization is a very, very big carrot, and we need to play it when the situation and the foundations are right. And it's not at the moment. It's the complete opposite trajectory, and I sense that, this is the discussion we've been having earlier. How can we get the Saudis more involved? It's a very difficult question, because for a long time, the Saudis have maintained a particular position of not being too close and not being too far. This is really the Saudi position, and I think they've been very comfortable at managing this distance, which now there is this pressure, and in particular, there is an Arab-Israeli order that has been ruptured. One can look at it in this way and says, listen, you're going to have to play a role here. Now, this is, in my opinion, an opportunity, but, because Saudi Arabia is a leader, but you're going to have to help leaders lead. And we're going to have to make them comfortable in leading and making sure that whatever efforts that they will exert, that it has some sort of benefit. Otherwise, there is the risk that the Netanyahu machine will manipulate this as to say, you see, we got the Saudis to do 1, 2, and 3. Because let's not forget also, there is this, intention that the role of the Saudis will play is security. They will put the forces there. They will start monitoring. They will play a policing role. And this is so distant. When did Saudi ever do this other than Bahrain in 2011? And for the Saudis to do this and to take, it will seem like they are complicit in this process in Gaza and this military campaign in Gaza, which the Saudis are very keen to avoid. So I think a lot of people are asking, what can the Saudis do? But reality is, they're doing everything to not make the Saudis do something. This is the situation.
Right. As you said, insofar as we know what the Saudis want to see from Israel, we've only really seen the opposite.
Yes.
In terms of what it would take.
I just want to also say this. I've never seen a government in Israel that wants something so bad, yet does the complete opposite to get it. The complete opposite to get it. We want to normalize with Saudi, but we're going to have more annexation. We're going to have more. We want to normalize with Saudi, but we're going to stay more in Gaza. I don't know. I need to pinch myself sometimes. I don't understand why would people begin to think that we may accommodate this? And then it brings into the question: is this really about explaining what the Saudis are, or is this something else? Is this, let's politicize the notion of Saudi, and discussion of Saudi is not really about Saudi. It's about how we could fit Saudi in our discourse and our roles, and I think this is the real danger. This is why I appreciate kind of these kinds of platforms, because I feel like it's going to sound weird, but my Saudiness is placed in the right in the right place, in my opinion.
Yeah, and we have a question here about if the reluctance is around Netanyahu, or if a different Israeli government could attain normalization. But that's probably has to do more with the policy than it does about the people, I would imagine,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
It's will there be an Israeli government that is willing to take the steps necessary, not Netanyahu or not Netanyahu, but rather what is that government willing to do vis-a-vis the Palestinians? Is that?
I think the Saudis won't care who it is, unfortunately, unless they deliver. So yes.
We have another quick question here about if the Sunni Arab states are secretly thrilled about Israel bombing Iran.
No. No, I don't think so. And the reason being because I think there's that's one of the things that I would like to talk about also about the region is that it's divided a lot of the times, people divide it into kind of sects. There's Sunnis, Shiites, and this. By the way, in the Iran-Iraq war, in 1980 to 88, most of the Shiites in Iraq were fighting against Iran. If you look at, for example, Hamas, they're Sunni, and they're being supported by the Shiite kind of thing. So this sectarian angle in itself, a lot of the times I urge caution to if people would base these kinds of lines. Let me also just say this. Now, when you speak to people that have been affected, people in Yemen, for example, people in Syria, who have been at the receiving end of the negative policies of Iran, and who have been impressing kind of these people, then I would say there's certainly no love lost. But I'm really answering in regards to the principle that a Shiite means anti-Sunni or a Sunni means anti-Shiite. It's the same thing as saying Arab versus Jew and Jew versus Arab. It's more complex than this.
I mean, I'm not going to Saudi-splain or regional-splain, but it does seem to me that if you're in the wider region, there's clearly a history of animosity with Iran and attacks Iran and orchestrated proxies and all the things that Aziz is describing. There's also a fundamental reality that you have a broader region that's trying to remake itself economically and diplomatically in the broader region. And the bottom line is war is bad for business.
Yes.
They want a region that's increasingly stable. Donald Trump's visit to the Gulf was about economic deals. They're interested in making deals, and that requires a level of stability. And the other piece is maybe obvious, and it's the Gulf taking the same approach that Donald Trump has in the first few days of this conflict, which is to say, we're not with the Israelis on this. This is totally the Israelis. We have nothing to do with it because they do not want the Iranian blowback that would come with being perceived to be an alliance with Israel. And I'm not saying the Saudi, I mean for everybody else. I wouldn't dare.
You're allowed to. I'm giving you some here. You could.
I'm just going to read one that has a short answer. Should Gazans who want to leave Gaza be permitted to leave? Yes. Okay, next one.
100% yes. I think Gazans should be allowed to leave any war zone, and like many thousands of Syrians have begun to return to Syria, Palestinians who leave this conflict should have the option to go back. My concern with the Gaza Riviera concept is that it, at least as framed and as understood inside Israel, is very much sort of in concert with the idea of resettlement of communities in Gaza and ultimately long-term hold on the territory, which I believe will sap Israel's military, create new military constraints and economic constraints and constraints on its democracy and more. But yes, 100% people should be allowed to leave a war zone if they, in any situation.
Yeah. And I will name, I think, some of the reactions by Palestinians have been because they have a deep fear they won't be able to return, which is a reasonable fear. That is sort of a historical trauma that how Palestinians experience their history in terms of leaving in 1948 and not being able to return to their homes. And so I think that fear is legitimate. And of course, many other communities have been able to leave and then come back after the war is hopefully over. We have a lot of questions here, which is amazing. There's a question here about why does Hamas keep fighting, which I think gets to an interesting question of why and how this war continues, and what are the options for where we can see it heading? Is there some version of this where we are winding down, especially with the war ramping up against Iran? Or is it going to kind of continue at this, I guess we can call it medium intensity conflict on an ongoing basis?
Do you want to take
Why is Hamas?
Why is Hamas still fighting?
Let's do that one, yeah.
After.
Okay.
Yeah.
We should ask Hamas. They're not. No, I think Hamas now, its entire reason for fighting is that the way in which it will declare victory is that it is not completely eliminated at the end of the day. That is victory. There is no other leverage they have than, of course, the hostages and the release of Palestinians being held in Israeli jails. They want to have that symbol of their victory, and this is not an organization that has shown much regard for human life. I think that is something that is pretty darn apparent after the atrocities of October 7th and everything thereafter. They are not driven by anything other than their radical goals and agenda. I think this is why they're not fighting. They are immune. I always found it to be a challenge that we can say that Hamas could end this suffering if it just releases the hostage, but Hamas doesn't actually see the suffering as part of the problem because they have been so seemingly immune to human suffering and ending human suffering by releasing the hostages. So yes, that's why it has been such a vexing war, because it's unclear what sort of military pressure or diplomatic pressure would get them to cease fighting when at the end of the day, as long as they can survive in any way, shape, or form, they will claim that they have put the Palestinian issue back on the global agenda and have succeeded in doing so. That's the vexing problem, fighting a terrorist organization that doesn't have regard for these things. I don't know if you have anything.
I mean, when an organization is based on trying to resist, they will find anything to resist against, and that's just part of the way they want to exist. So for them, I think it's just finding a way to continue to exist, to be there, to be relevant, and as David said, to survive. All it takes is just one person left, and even then, I don't think because these people could go, but the ideology won't, and it's very dangerous. It's very, very dangerous. So I think it's a lot more easy to destruct than construct, and I think this is what they're emblematic of.
Moving to the future, when we think about a horizon that's secure, stable, peaceful, with a secure Jewish democratic Israel, regional stability and security, many of us envision two states, one for Israelis and one for Palestinians. I think I speak for the three of us here when that is what we envision, when we can be that level of optimistic. And so what would it take to get us there? From a regional level, what role can Saudis play, Israelis, Palestinians, Americans, all the different players? Can you kind of walk us through the principles that would, I know you can, walk us through the principles that would be needed to take us there, recognizing that we are in a moment of deep despair, of ongoing war on many fronts for Israel, but also recognizing that we're not likely to see an optimistic future without the emergence of two states.
We are obviously very far from realizing a lot of this, but I think the kinds of things that we should start on right now is first and foremost, I think, fundamental change, reform within the Palestinian Authority governance in the West Bank. We have a 90-year-old leader, just about 90. The joke is that his father lived to be 114 and died of a car accident.
Yeah.
A
20-year-old smoker.
And he's a
smoker
chain
as well.
smoker with a heart condition. That's right. And deeply authoritarian, corrupt, unpopular. And he's now holds the strings in the West Bank. And so, yes, the idea of the Palestinian Authority going back to Gaza right now seems pretty ridiculous because they simply do not have the wherewithal to do it. But that's why we're actually in an urgent matter to make sure that fundamental changes and reform happen now so that a new leadership construct can emerge, one that would enjoy relationships with Israel in maintaining the kind of security cooperation in the West Bank, but also enjoy the popularity and the popular support of the Palestinian people through functioning institutions. Palestinians see Israeli democracy and are envious of it, right? With all due respect to the Saudis, they're not interested in a royal family coming and being imposed on them. They see the way in which Israelis hold their leaders accountable, and they say they want some of that, frankly. And so there is a culture of democracy envy. But the institutions of the Palestinian Authority are, frankly, deeply eroded, corrupt, increasingly authoritarian, and unable to allow for political expression. First and foremost is we need to really be serious when we talk about Palestinian Authority reform and not just use it as a talking point, not only because we need to prepare for the idea of a 90-year-old chain smoker to pass away, but because ultimately, if you're going to have Palestinians governing Palestinians in Gaza, the West Bank is the place to start. Building up their core legitimacy. But secondly, I would argue, in addition to replacing the current leadership on the Palestinian side, is replacing the current leadership on the Israeli side. Because I continue to believe that the missing link to healing from October 7 is a return of the hostages, that I don't think Israel can fully heal until that chapter is closed and the hostages are returned. And I don't believe Israelis can fully heal until all who are responsible for October 7 are held accountable. That means Hamas, but it also means Israel's own failed leadership that enabled October 7 to happen in the first place. The lack of accountability, the lack of an even investigation of what went wrong will continue to hold Israeli society back. And so, yes, we need new leaders. That's a small talking point, but a reality is that there needs to be fundamentally different leaders on the ground. And the argument and the debate that I'm going to have with my friend Aziz over the next few days when we're traveling together is I do believe that the region has a very important opportunity to be a carrot to reaching the Israeli public and being able to realize a different future. The talking point that is going to be much debated for years to come and between us and the days to come is the Sadat-like moment. 5 years after the horrors of the Yom Kippur War and the shock and trauma of the Yom Kippur War and the failure of the government on the Yom Kippur War, you had Sadat going to Jerusalem, and I guarantee Israelis a year and a half after the Yom Kippur War were not itching for peace with Egypt, just like Israelis right now are not itching for peace with the Palestinians. But when presented with a vision of a different future, Israelis jumped at the chance. And so through tragedy, I think, can come opportunity. And the last thing that I will say, love him or hate him, Donald Trump is in the White House right now at one of the most consequential periods of time for the next generation, frankly. The decisions that he makes with Hezbollah being decimated, a new Syria in place, a Palestinian Authority facing the need for a change and reform that presents opportunity. Gaza, with Hamas decimated, presents an opportunity to work on rebuilding as part of a regional process. All of these things are challenges, including the Iran war, but they're also opportunities. And there is the way to bring in the Saudis is to present a genuine opportunity that is not giving a promise for a concept that nobody actually believes in. I used to talk about the two-state solution. It wasn't surprising that you have such low polling numbers in support from Israelis and Palestinians for a two-state solution, because you might as well ask them if they believe in Santa Claus, right? Because it's such a fantastical concept that doesn't actually feel reality. So you have to be able to have a process in which it actually feels tangible and real, not high-minded peace conferences in Paris that talk about the idea of Palestinian statehood, but don't actually have any impact on the ground.
Aziz, please.
Yes, thank you. So I think to add to that is building these institutions, but regionalizing these institutions. This is where I think is the process of the opportunity, is to build these institutions, these Palestinian-Israeli institutions, Palestinian hyphenated Israeli or Israeli Palestinian hyphenated institutions, and regionalizing it. This is where I think we could get somewhere. This is where I think the role people in the region can play. Because I think this is one of the things that will speak to the tangibility that is required for these regional actors to be confident in entering into this process. Because that's one thing, because they don't want to enter into a process that has no tangibility in it, and we're just going to waste time. There's another thing here, I think, that's important. I think anybody looking at the Middle East, for example, in recent years, will probably come to the term bailout diplomacy. So in other words, countries that are saying, okay, well, let's bail this country out, but rather than just give them money, let's, usually between the Gulf and Egypt, by the way, let's just, let's use this as an investment. And then this is where they're playing game, they're playing ball, and that's fine. I think we in the region now are in the midst of a reconstruction diplomacy. There's now, not only in the West Bank, not only in Gaza, not only in Syria, but Lebanon as well. Now, when we have, this reconstruction diplomacy, it's an opportunity, because we're not only reconstructing physical things, we're reconstructing processes that will then enable these tangible outcomes. And this is and we're going to have to do things different now, because the region in itself is overstretched. You look at, for example, the Saudi foreign minister. He's everywhere, man. He's genuinely everywhere. He's in every part.
He's the Saudi Steve Witkoff?
Yeah, the Saudi, well, I don't think Steve Witkoff said anything to on this guy. He's literally everywhere, and doing something. No, I'm just kidding. But he's, and one then really thinks, okay, can the process of rebuilding, can the discussion of reconstruction, is it only just confined to officials? What role do we have in this? What can we do in maintaining and playing into the open discourse? What kind of opportunities can we bring to the table? And I think this is why when we're rethinking not only our relations with other interstate relations, but also within the state, and how certain institutions within the state can operate as well. Because I think we're going to have all the help we could get, quite frankly. We're going to have a far more harmonious approach to this. And that's what I mean by reconstruction diplomacy. It's, another thing. How can we leverage international projects that are supposed to happen in the region, like IMEC? Now, everybody was talking and excited about IMEC in 2023. Benjamin Netanyahu stands here in New York. Where am I? In New York, yes. And, with the sign that didn't have Palestine in it, by the way. And he was saying, look, this is basically a celebration.
You should explain IMEC.
I'm sorry. Yes, thank you. So IMEC is the Indian Middle East Economic Corridor. Something that links, thank you for that. Something that links, it's a trade corridor that links basically through a boating lane, shipping lane, train tracks, through Saudi Arabia, from the UAE, through Saudi Arabia, to Jordan, into Israel, and then into Europe through the Mediterranean. Now, why, hold on, why can't it go through the West Bank? Why can't it go through Gaza? Why can't we leverage that? This is what I mean by reconstruction diplomacy. It's about using the help and leveraging these initiatives for this process, for these processes. And that's the thing that we need to be thinking. What role does the private sector play here? It's a difficult question, but I think even entertaining the process in itself is healthy. We don't have to have outcomes. Let's just get the process going. So I think this is what I mean by the reconstruction diplomacy, is that how can we begin to see new ways, leveraging what we have in a way that makes sense for everyone.
Yeah, you've just answered several of the questions, which had to do with what's in it for Saudi Arabia, what role can they play, and where there is incentive for Saudi Arabia to meet a deal with Israel. But I think that most parties, other than perhaps Hamas and the Islamic Republic of Iran, have what to gain from this type of regional cooperation that we've been talking about. And I want to name that I really appreciated how many questions we got. I don't think I've ever got so many questions in a panel with like an audience double or triple this size. I haven't gotten that many questions, so it's really fantastic. I noticed that a lot of them were looking for answers of who to blame, which I think is really reasonable, right? Whose fault is this? How did we end up here? And what I appreciate about this panel is that we made such a concerted effort to be forward-looking. I think the answer is that there's a lot of blame to go around, and I spend a lot of my time, unfortunately, thinking about that, thinking of how to hold people accountable, and at the same time, thinking of how to get past that. And on October 7th, many of us, I'm sure in this room, and certainly all of those in the region, had a lot of their illusions shattered around security, around peace, my whole worldview in many ways too, and I've had to put that back together. And I so appreciate being in conversation with people who are thinking so critically about how we're going to rebuild in the day after, which is really hard to do when we're in the middle of it, in the middle of several wars at the same time, and are still able to somehow have the optimism and the pragmatism to think critically about how we're going to move forward in the coming days and weeks and decades potentially. So I so appreciate you both being here, and I want to thank Central Synagogue again for having us. Again, those in your 20s and 30s, you can follow Amelia if you want to raise your hand, who's going to show you where to turn to for a reception. And you can find Israel Policy Forum online. We have a podcast, Israel Policy Pod, which I sometimes host if you want to listen. And these two are sometimes on it as well. And we have a range of activities for 20s and 30s at Central and through Israel Policy Forum's IPF Atid. It's great to see you all. Have a great night.
Thank you.
Thank you.